Hey, welcome to the show. I'm Maggie.
I'm Mike.
We're friends on fire.
And we are on a mission to get friends to talk about money.
We've been getting a lot of great feedback lately. Thank you so much for your reviews. There's one review we got, Mike, that I feel like we need to address on the show.
Okay. Is it about me or you?
It's about me.
Okay, let's read it then.
So this was an Apple iTunes review. I would like to start by saying it is a 5-star review.
Great.
But I'm going to be vulnerable and read it to you, Mike.
Okay.
Maggie's vocal fry is super distracting. That's my only constructive criticism. Otherwise, great ideas offered that are really tangible. 5 stars.
That's a great review.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's positive because it is 5 stars, so thank you. First off, when I read this, I had no idea what vocal fry was. I then went down a rabbit hole of Googling vocal fry, watching way too many YouTube videos on what it is and how you correct it. And I would like to say I have a very minor case of vocal fry, but I am now very educated on vocal fry. I notice it in other people's voices. I just am very aware of it now. I can't undo what I have learned about vocal fry. I'm not even going to begin to explain it for you. I would just like to say I truly believe feedback is a gift. And so, Green Appaholic, thank you for the gift. I'm working on my vocal fry.
And thank you for the 5 stars. I'm glad you like it.
Yeah.
All right. So now that we've gotten these personal criticisms of your voice aside,
thanks.
Do we have any voicemails to play?
We do. We've got a voicemail from Alex. So let's play it.
Hi, this is Alex. I live in Decatur, Georgia, and I have a question for Maggie and Mike. Let's say, and this is a question personally for the two of you, even though you don't have to get into specific numbers. At the end of each month, you obviously save and invest money. I'm very curious to hear your answers to, let's say, at the end of a month, you each have $1,000 that you can put away to save or invest after all your expenses. I'm saying 1,000 because it would be a nice round number. Where do you put that $1,000? Do you break it up into cash or investments or real estate? And more specifically, I'd love to hear what types of investments.
So that's a really interesting question. And
he's basically asking, when you have extra savings at the end of the month, what should you do with it?
Yeah, we can kind of answer this in 2 parts. Depending on where you are in your financial planning journey, the answer is going to be different. If you are at the place where you are not yet maxing out all of your different accounts, like 401k or HSA, or if you're eligible for a Roth, or you have a mortgage, then the decision becomes, where does that $1,000 get you the highest rate of return? For most people, it's going to be contributing to a 401k or an HSA to get the match, to max out the HSA and get the tax benefits. We'll do a follow-up episode about how you should prioritize your investments, but you would really want to be doing your retirement account or your debts that have the highest rate of return and putting that $1,000 towards that.
I agree with Mike. It just depends on where you are in your financial journey. So Dave Ramsey has, his steps on kind of the order in which you pay things off. And to Mike's point, we can do a whole episode in that. But it does depend on if you still have a lot of debt on your mortgage, et cetera, you might want to put it towards your mortgage. That to me is actually a mental decision, not a financial decision of just wanting to be debt free. If you've already done all those things, like you have an emergency fund, you're maxing out your 401k, you've paid off your mortgage, et cetera, you don't have any car payments, all that. I personally would take that $1,000 and I would put it into a Wealthfront account, or I would put it into like the VTax fund of just basic index funds, essentially.
So for me personally, I'm the same way. So I've already maxed out all these opportunities. I don't have a mortgage. I would put it into my brokerage account and then invest it in something. I'm not involved in Wealthfront like Maggie, and so I don't put $1,000 every month into investments. I will save up and then wait for good buying opportunities to go buy $5,000 or $10,000 or $20,000 of a specific investment I think is a good buying opportunity. I always move any excess into my brokerage account so that I'm ready to go do that.
Versus like I have an auto amount go into Wealthfront, different types of risk accounts within Wealthfront on a regular basis. And then I'll sometimes go buy a bunch of an index fund that basically matches the S&P 500 and is low cost.
And as we've learned from our update on our investing challenge, you seem to be doing quite well at this. You're now beating me.
Wealthfront's winning. Wealthfront versus Mike, 1 point. Okay, thanks for the question, Alex. Great discussion. We'll maybe dig deeper into that in a future episode also. Let's dig into our topic for today.
So we're going to be talking about splitting or combining your finances with your partner. And I think this is a really interesting topic because we both have very different perspectives on it. I am married and It's my first marriage, and only marriage is my plan. But this is your second marriage, Maggie. So you're in a little bit different of a situation.
Yes, I will confirm this is my second marriage.
That was more of a lead in to you.
I'm just kidding. Yeah. So I think, I think what is interesting is just maybe for us to like share a little bit about how we approach our finances with our partners. And then get into some of the kind of, pros and cons and thoughts on the idea of split versus combined finances. Because I know a lot of people who do both. So first off, my story is when I was first married, I was married pretty young, right out of college. We were married for 10 years. We also had split finances, which was just something that we had agreed on. And quite honestly, at the time I was just coming out of college, did not have a lot of debt, had worked really hard in college and literally had a lot of jobs in college and had a priority to not have a lot of debt. I was marrying somebody who had a lot more debt, credit card and student loans. And the thought of kind of combining that felt weird to me because I was like, wait, I just worked all this time and so hard to avoid this. And then I'm going to be saddled with that day one. And so for us, it just felt like it made sense to have different finances. And it worked for us, right? You might think like, oh, well, she's divorced, so don't take her advice on split finances. But I will say, my ex-husband and I have a very amicable relationship. We did not fight a lot while we were married. We had a good relationship, and finances are not the reason that we are no longer married. We really didn't have a lot of arguments or disagreements over finances, and it kind of worked for us, right? There were times when I made more money than him, and I was able to kind of like pitch in more on certain things and fund certain things more. But overall, it worked for us. And, I would help pay off his student loans at times when I could and was in a position to. All of the like day-to-day decisions we were making that weren't like joint house financial stuff, we were able to make at our own choices and at our own paces. And it really worked for us.
When you were first married or early in your marriage, or really any point in that first marriage, did you guys discuss which approach was right, or did you just always have it split and just kept going because it worked?
Yeah, it's funny. I can't really remember, honestly. My ex-husband has a way better memory than I do, so I should ask him that question. But I think it was something we actively discussed. Like, I seem to remember us discussing it and agreeing on it. And again, it worked for us and it was fine. And my immediate thought when I met my current husband and when we got married and we're kind of joining our lives together, it's a lot different when you are divorced with kids because there's child support coming in, going out, et cetera. And so there's a lot more sort of complexities to things. But we were later in our life. We were in our mid-30s. And so we were, later in our lives, more established. We also decided to do split finances. And it's worked really well for us, right? Like we share all of the family expenses, but we also have our own accounts and all of our own credit cards and individual expenses. And we split the stuff that is combined and we have a kind of way that we, true up each month. And it works really well for us. How do you guys do things, Mike?
Well, it's important to understand first that both my parents and Britta's parents both had combined finances. So this was not like I always just thought this was the normal way to do it. Britta and I met when I was in graduate school, and when we lived together for a few years before we were married, we sort of had split finances. I was working and making a lot more money. And so she would pay for some of the expenses, like we'd go to the grocery store and like groceries, she would always buy those things, but I would pay rent. And so we split some of those things. But as soon as we moved to Atlanta and we were going to get married and then married, we effectively just combined all of our finances, and it was never really a question or a decision point. It was just seemed to make the most sense. And I think the big difference for me is that I look at it from a financial management perspective. And so having things combined gives you fewer touch points and fewer points of, failure when you're managing a very complex household financial system. And so legally speaking, when two people are married, it's my understanding that all that stuff is shared. So you can have two checking accounts and you can have your paychecks deposited into those. And you can say that one person is paying for one thing, but it's really one shared life.
Depends whether you have a prenup or not, but keep going.
That's true. If you don't have a prenup, then all of that stuff really is just one life. And so it's how you are thinking about it versus how it's really structured legally and institutionally between different accounts. And so for us, we have one checking account. We pay all of our expenses out of that. Legally, of course, we both have separate 401ks and we have separate IRAs. Everything else is combined. And it makes it a lot easier for us to manage because we're not discussing who pays for what. We just pay for it. Sometimes we'll get into little discussions about, well, I earn money and so I should be paying for this, or I pay for this. And you can go down the rabbit hole on that discussion because once money goes into your account, it just kind of exists digitally. There's no dollars changing hands. So all of this money truly is shared, and that's how we approach it from a management perspective.
What we want to talk about are some of the considerations and things you should think about when trying to decide if you're going to have split or combined finances. And I think it's funny, at first I was trying to think about this as far as like pros and cons or benefits of one versus the other. But I think a better way for us to talk about this is just the different considerations. We've both been just doing the approach we have for so long, we don't really even think about the other. But in having these discussions, it's made me kind of think like, what are the pros and cons, and or just really considerations. One thing I will say, and just to start with the idea of split finances, is I mentioned this before briefly. We have very little disagreements or kind of run-ins about financial topics because we have split finances. And so I guess my point would just be there are less opportunities for situations where there's a disagreement or conflict about how money is spent as a result of that. And I was actually asking my husband about this last night. He's been in 2 different relationships where he had one with combined finances and one with split, and had a lot of great thoughts to add on the topic. And one of the things he was saying to me is he said, I really like that it's my money and I can choose how to spend it or not spend it. And he likes having his own savings target because it really makes him feel in control of how and when he hits those goals. I like that. And the thing that I think is most important, it can be really hard to do split. Ironically, it can be hard to do split finances if you have different goals and ideals about money. We happen to have very similar views and are very aligned in a lot of our thinking. And you still need to have copious amounts of discussions about money and about, your views and priorities and all of that, I think, for any relationship to work, whether it's split or combined. So it doesn't pull out the idea of communication and communicating about money out of a relationship by choosing one or the other.
The real key to what you just said, though, is that you two are fairly like-minded in this. And so I think one of the takeaways here is that if you are fairly aligned with your partner, you can do either combined or split finances and make it work. But if you are misaligned, then it doesn't matter how you do it.
Yeah,
there is
totally
going to be big problems down the line.
Yeah.
Take everything we're saying with a grain of salt. Find what works for you, but then get aligned with your partner, track your expenses, monitor your net worth, do all these other things that we've been talking about. That's the real key. It's not about splitting or combining.
So I think another consideration that's really important to think about when deciding what would be best for you, if there's a really big difference in salaries, then the idea of split finances could be an issue or just not appropriate to do. And especially if one person in the relationship is not working at all, it wouldn't work, obviously.
Right.
And so that's why, I think it's just, you just need to consider these different approaches and considerations and figure out what works for you.
If both people in the relationship earn about the same amount of money and have similar spending habits, then it's really not an issue because you're both going to be bringing home about the same and making similar decisions. But if one person makes very little or nothing, there's a likely chance that they'll feel extremely guilty and unhappy about their situation in the household. If the high earner has to, quote unquote, cover 90% of the expenses, and the other person who earns very little has to cover 10, then that usually leads to some pretty guilty feelings about how much they're contributing to the family.
Yeah, totally. And that's why I say, I would never recommend that if one person is not working, right, and taking care of the kids or, something else. The other thing is, my husband brought this point up, and I actually thought it was a great point to talk about. So thanks, Greg. We were talking about this last night, and he was telling me that when he first told one of his friends that we had split finances, they kind of looked at him funny. And he was like, one thing I want people to understand is that it shouldn't be viewed as taboo or unusual to have split finances. I know many other people and couples who have split finances for various reasons. I just think I would encourage people to not think of it as a bad thing. Or a taboo thing. My husband and I have a ton of conversations about money and very open communication about money in a very healthy relationship. And it doesn't mean anything bad, right? And I'll use this as a plug too. We'll do a future episode on this topic, but I'm a huge fan of prenups. And I think they can be a really valuable tool. And again, we'll do a whole episode on like wills and prenups and kind of financially related legal documents that are options. But a lot of people with prenups even think that they're taboo and that it means like you don't love someone or you're thinking about the worst case happening or, whatever else. First off, if you ever get divorced, you'll probably be a big fan of prenups too, because you'll realize the law and how much there's actually benefits in protecting yourself up front. Let me just give you, one scenario of, why some of this stuff can matter. Mike, you made a comment earlier. It doesn't matter whose account is in whose name. If something were to happen, it's all, family assets essentially that you would be dealing with and kind of looking at. But with a prenup, it's not. Right? You've actually agreed that all sorts of different things, whatever you want to agree to with your partner. But the thing I think about tied to just using prenups as an example, but even with thinking about split or combined finances, is the idea that it's ridiculous to think about that you could marry someone, have them violate the trust in your marriage, and then take half your 401k. Like, that's a crazy thought to me. Do you not think so?
Yeah, of course.
So like anyone who sort of like snubs their nose at a prenup, I'm like, well, like, let me lay out some scenarios to you. And then like all of a sudden it might sound like a better idea to you. Anyways, like I said, we'll do a whole episode on that sometime.
Another consideration is where you are in your life, how old you are. And so if you're very young and one person has debt and one person doesn't, and you are getting married and planning for the long term, I know, Maggie, this was one of the reasons you didn't want to combine. But I would look at it as an opportunity to combine and help out that person not have to deal with the implications of carrying debt for a long time. So if Britta had been carrying student loan debt when I married her, it would be in my long-term interest to help her pay off that debt so that we were not carrying that burden and paying those costs for the long term. And so again, this is one of those things where you can do it both ways. Both ways work, both ways can fail, but you should be mindful about the implications both ways.
Yeah, totally agree.
All those considerations aside, and they're all very valid, I personally view family finances like the CFO of a company.
Of course you do.
Yeah, because that's how I think about
CFO
everything.
Is Chief Financial Officer, by the way.
A CFO, big expenses, and sometimes all expenses, are reviewed in aggregate. So there aren't multiple people making decisions about how to go spend the money and not rolling that up to one decision maker, because then you lose track of all of these things that you're committing to, all the liabilities you incur, as well as all the income you have. So you need to have one view of this. So all of the decisions should be rolling up to one decision maker, or in the case of a marriage, a combined decision-making process.
I think what's interesting actually about your point in comparing it to a company and a CFO is even at a company, you have different cost centers, and each person, like, at work, I have my budget. I'm accountable for my budget. Other peers of mine that we all roll up to the same team are accountable for their own budget. But we do come together at the end of every month and we review the budget together. And if that person's over on their travel budget, it's going to impact me because I'm not going to be able to spend as much throughout the year. And so it's actually interesting to compare it to a company, because I think you could combine split and combine finances to the way that a company operates. My husband and I, we still have a financial review at the end of every month, and we talk about where we are against our goals. We talk about what we spent as a family, what we spent individually. Like, even though it's not my money, I'll be like, did you really need to go buy XYZ or good job on, XYZ this month?
Yeah, which is the same way it happens in a company. The important point to follow up in your example is that those original budgets are set by one person. Yes. And then given down. And then your boss also has accountability for all of his team's spend. And so even if you have separate accounts, you still need to be rolling this all up and having one decision-making point.
Totally agree.
The other thing that a CFO does is long-term planning. In order to decide when you can retire, which is especially important for FIRE and what we're talking about, you need to understand where all of your income is coming from, where your liabilities are and when they will end, your other commitments that you have. You need to have one view of this.
Totally agree.
But that one view doesn't necessarily have to be one account. You can have separate accounts. You can have separate tracking, but you need to be doing it together. Yeah. And I think that's kind of the nuance of this discussion.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Because we, to wrap this up, we were going to discuss, like, what's better, having split or combined finances. The reality is neither is better. It's such a personal decision. There's no right or wrong way. It's up to you and your partner to decide what's best for your relationship and your situation in life, and how you want to do things. And it doesn't even have to always stay the same, right? It could adjust over time.
All right. So this has been sort of a conversation all over the place. We've sort of contradicted some of our own points, but I think it actually reinforces the idea that there is no right answer.
Yeah. And the point contradiction is because I don't want, like for mine, I don't want anyone to think that I think combined finances is wrong, right? I think it's great and it works great for a lot of people. I've just really enjoyed split finances.
And I personally can see no other way of doing it other than combined. But we both agree that it works for our two families.
Yeah.
All right, so let's cover our top 3 points and wrap this episode up.
Okay. What's number 1, Mike?
I think the number 1 thing would be don't get divorced.
No, that is not number 1.
Well, financially speaking, it is best not to get divorced.
Okay, but just to be clear, as someone who is divorced, you're wrong. And I'm only half joking. Look, there's a lot of very legitimate reasons that people get divorced. For safety reasons, they've fallen out of love, their spouse leaves them and they don't have a choice. Like, who knows? Not my business, but lots of legitimate reasons. I think Mike's point is he hears me talk about the financial aftermath of different things. His advice is don't get divorced, which I think is great advice for you and for me in my current relationship. But just saying, we're not judging. There's a lot of very legitimate reasons people need to get a divorce and should get a divorce. But our top 3 on the idea of split or combined finances really is, number 1 is decide what is best for you in your life stage and life situation. And like we said, it's not set in stone. It can always adjust over time.
Number 2 is that you have to do this together, regardless of which method you choose. So track your expenses together, discuss together, plan together. It's all just on paper. You share a life and you share your finances. And if you feel like you have separate lives and separate finances, that's going to be a problem down the road.
And finally, number 3 is when in conflict, choose love over money. So I know I might sound a little cold-hearted when I talk about split finances or prenups or any of that, but I do think it is worth making the point that I always aim to choose compassion and love over a financial dollar situation and just make, the right decisions for your relationship in real time as you need to make them. Your relationship is more important than money is my point here. Wouldn't you agree, Mike?
Yeah, I totally agree. And having control of your finances and being mindful about these things and talking to your partner about money, it helps your relationships. It helps your marriage. It helps your friendships. That's why we're doing this.
I think it's actually one of the best things you can do for your relationship, honestly, is to have the right level of communication and candor. The right level of communication and candor. Candor? Candor, I think is in the Star Wars universe. I think we've had this conversation before.
Probably.
I'm not good at
this
word,
I'm going to keep
clearly.
having it until you correct your pronunciation.
How do you say the word?
Candor.
Candor. Candor. I think having the right level of communication and candor in your relationship is one of the most important things in any relationship. And we're actually going to do a whole episode on this in the future. So the importance of money tied to your relationship.
Great.
Okay. Good discussion. Okay, we're going to do a Mike's Minute on the Mic. This is where I get to ask Mike one question, and he has 60 seconds to answer it. And let me get my stopwatch going. Mike, honestly, what did you think when I first told you that we had split finances?
I thought it made sense because this is your second marriage. I was hoping that it would turn into an opportunity where I could convince you to combine your finances. But since having the discussion and hearing about how you guys do things, it really kind of changed my perspective on it, because what I realized and what I discussed in this episode just now is that it is more about how aligned you are with your partner, not about the process by which you manage your money. So you guys are very much aligned in how you view money and save money and spend money, and how you do that on paper doesn't make a big difference. So you have changed my perspective on this, Maggie.
I honestly did not know that was your answer, so I wasn't trying to give myself a compliment. But
you'll take it.
Yeah, but I'll take it. But no, that's great. Thanks for sharing. It's helpful to hear. Okay, let's wrap this episode up. I enjoyed this discussion because I think it's always just helpful to kind of hear how other people are doing things and how other people are thinking about things related to money, which is the entire purpose of this show. So, as always, if you have any comments or questions or tips, please give us a call or text us at 404 981-3370. We would love to hear from you and we'll play it on the air.
Please leave us a review on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. It really helps other people find this show, and we appreciate it.
Awesome. You can also find us at friendsonfire.org if you want to check out the latest episodes or sign up for email alerts or just get in touch with us.
All right. Thanks, Maggie.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike.
Bye.
Bye.